It had been 5 years since I'd seen everyone together, and as I parked outside my parents' house, I caught myself rehearsing a smile. The same cracked driveway, the same wind chime on the porch. Everything looked frozen in time. Except me. I wasn't the woman who used to cry in her car after family dinners. I'd survived a divorce, built a career, and learned to rely on no one but myself. I walked in holding a basket of desserts, my peace offering and shield. The house buzzed with laughter, perfume, and overlapping stories. My mother's voice floated from the kitchen. My sister's laugh rang louder than everyone's. For a brief second, it felt like home again, until my brother-in-law spotted me. He gave a mocking whistle. "Well, look who finally decided to join the living. Miss Independent herself." I laughed politely. He was always the loudest one in the room, forever performing for attention. My sister Leah squeezed my arm, whispering, "Ignore him. You know how he is." Dinner smelled like nostalgia. Roasted chicken, garlic bread, overcooked green beans. As I passed plates, the conversation shifted like tides around me. Someone asked about my job, and I explained how I'd just gotten promoted. "Finance manager," I said, maybe a little too proudly. It felt good to have something solid to my name again. "Oh, so that's why you've been so quiet," my brother-in-law Greg said, grinning. "Stacking those big savings, huh? Don't forget the little people when you hit 6 figures." Everyone laughed, including Leah. I smiled, pretending it was all harmless teasing, but the way he said savings made something inside me flinch. I brushed it off, focusing on my niece's drawings at the table. Children were easier. They didn't measure you against what they thought you owed. Still, I noticed Leah watching me with that half smile she used when she wanted something but hadn't yet asked. After dessert, conversations split into corners. Dad showed old photos, Mom bragged about her girls, and Greg poured wine like he owned the house. He kept calling me the rich aunt, telling anyone who'd listen that I probably had a vault hidden somewhere. "Come on," he chuckled. "You're not fooling anyone. I bet you've got more money than all of us combined." I laughed again, this time tighter. "Not quite," I said. "I just budget well." The words came out lighter than I felt. I'd spent years clawing my way out of debt after my ex drained our joint account. Saving wasn't vanity, it was survival. I wasn't about to explain that to someone who thought struggle was a joke. By the end of the night, everyone hugged me goodbye like they meant it. Mom pressed leftovers into my hands, Leah kissed my cheek, and Greg winked. "Don't work too hard," he said. "Money's no fun if you don't share it." Driving home, I told myself not to overthink it. Families tease? Maybe I'd been gone too long. Maybe I was just sensitive. Still, his words echoed. Not playful anymore, but heavy, deliberate. Stacking those big savings. I unlocked my apartment, set the leftovers on the counter, and exhaled. The silence felt pure after the noise. I didn't know that by the next morning, that same silence would feel different. The kind that comes after something precious has been taken. Looking back, I can't remember a single year when Leah and Greg didn't need a little help. It started small, the way manipulation often does. 50 here, 100 there. They'd call late at night, voices syrupy with desperation. "You're the responsible one," Leah would say, half compliment, half command. "We just need a bit to get through the month." I always said yes, because that's what good sisters did, right? I told myself they'd pay it back once things got better. Things just never did. When I got my first real job out of college, I was proud of how carefully I managed every dollar. Leah laughed at me back then, calling me Grandma Saver. She said I should live a little. That worrying about the future was for people who expected to fail. Meanwhile, she and Greg lived like every Friday was payday, like consequences were for someone else. They had matching phones, flashy vacations, and constant excuses. The first time they asked for something big, it was to help with their down payment. "Just a temporary loan," Greg said, handing me a glass of wine as if generosity required lubrication. "We'll pay you back after the closing costs settle." I believed him because I wanted to. I wanted to be part of their world, a world that always seemed so easy and confident compared to mine. I transferred the money the next morning, proud to be helping family. Months passed. Then years. The topic quietly vanished like steam from a kettle. I used to tell myself I didn't mind. They had kids. I didn't. They had a mortgage, bills, car repairs. I had a tiny apartment and a spreadsheet of goals no one cared about. When Mom would say, "You're so lucky, dear. You've always landed on your feet," I wanted to tell her luck had nothing to do with it. But what was the point? No one listens when you're not the one in crisis. Holidays blurred into each other. Leah would show up with expensive handbags and say, "It was on sale," like the price tag had never existed. Greg would joke about my little accountant sister and ask if I could work my math magic to help them budget. But budgeting to them meant finding new ways to borrow without guilt. Every time I tried to draw a line, Leah would sigh and say, "You've changed. You used to be there for us." That sentence always landed like a slap. After my divorce, when I was barely holding myself together, Leah was the first to show up. Not with comfort, but with requests. "You're moving anyway," she said, standing among my boxes. "Could we borrow your spare fridge for a while? Ours broke and we're tight on cash." She took the fridge that day. I never saw it again. Later, I found out they'd sold it on Facebook Marketplace. She laughed when I confronted her. "Oh, come on," she said. "You weren't using it." The truth was, I'd been raised to believe that giving was proof of love. My parents, bless them, always preached that family comes first, even when family was the one cutting you open. When Dad lent Greg money for his business idea, I warned him to get it in writing. He told me I was being cold. 6 months later, Greg stopped taking his calls. Somewhere along the way, I became the designated rescuer, the safety net everyone used without gratitude. They praised me for being so strong, while taking pieces of that strength every time they needed to fix another mistake. I covered Leah's medical bill once, helped with her son's tuition another time, even co-signed a small car loan when Greg's credit got shot. I told myself I was doing the right thing, that someday they'd remember and do the same for me. But deep down, I knew they wouldn't. I can still picture the last time I swore I wouldn't lend them another cent. Leah had called crying about her electricity being cut off. "Please, just this once," she said. "We'll pay you next Friday." Next Friday came and went. The payment didn't. When I reminded her, she said, "It's just money. Don't be dramatic." I hung up and cried like a child, not because of the money, but because of how small she made me feel for caring. Over time, I learned to expect nothing. I stopped answering their calls on payday weekends. I told myself boundaries were strength, even when guilt chewed holes through me. But families like mine have a way of testing fences. They lean, they push, and if you give an inch, they take the gate. So when Greg joked at the reunion about my big savings, I should have heard the old warning bells. I should have remembered how quickly warmth turns to want in this family, but I wanted to believe this time was different, that maybe we'd outgrown the taking. That maybe, finally, I'd stopped being their open wallet. I didn't know that the line I'd drawn in my mind had already been crossed. Quietly, ruthlessly, while I was still passing them the mashed potatoes and pretending everything was fine. The next morning started like any other, quiet, ordinary, deceivingly calm. Sunlight spilled across the kitchen table, catching the rim of my coffee mug. I remember feeling almost proud of myself for going to that reunion, for not letting old wounds keep me away. I even smiled, thinking maybe this time things would stay peaceful. Maybe we'd finally turned a corner. Then, without thinking, I opened my banking app. Just a reflex. I liked to check that my savings were growing, a small habit that always gave me comfort. But when the numbers loaded, my breath snagged in my throat. Where there should have been a neat 6-figure sum, there was chaos. Line after line of withdrawals, transfers, amounts so large they blurred together. My fingers went cold around the phone. For a long second, I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe a glitch, maybe some system error. But the more I scrolled, the harder reality pressed down. My savings, everything I'd worked for since the divorce, were gone. Tens of thousands, drained in less than 24 hours. My heart started hammering, each beat louder than the next. I called the bank right away, voice trembling as I stumbled through my security questions. The woman on the line sounded calm, detached, like she'd seen panic 100 times that morning. "Let me pull up your file," she said. There was a pause. Then the kind of sigh people give when they wish they didn't have to speak. "Ma'am, these transfers appear authorized." "Authorized?" I could barely get the word out. "By who?" She hesitated. "The funds were transferred to an account that's still listed under your authorization history. A joint account." For a moment, everything inside me went silent. I hadn't shared a joint account with anyone in years. Not since Leah and Greg's house purchase, back when I co-signed to help them qualify for their mortgage. I'd removed my name, or so I thought. My voice dropped to a whisper. "Can you tell me the account holder's name?" Another pause. Then, Leah Walters. It felt like a punch to the chest. My sister's name, my own blood, staring back at me through the haze of betrayal. I wanted to argue, to scream that there must be some mistake. But the transactions didn't lie. The account routing numbers, the transfer confirmations, it all lined up. I tried to breathe, but the air felt thick, like I was drowning on dry land. I heard the banker still talking, offering to send forms, to open a fraud case, to escalate it for investigation. But her words blurred into static. My mind was spinning through memories. Leah laughing across the dinner table just hours before. Greg smirking as he joked about my savings, his tone too casual, too knowing. My stomach turned. They'd planned it. They'd sat there, eating my food, hugging me goodbye, knowing what they were about to do. The betrayal was surgical, timed perfectly, masked behind fake affection. After hanging up, I sat there staring at my reflection in the black screen of my phone. I felt stupid. Not just hurt, stupid. I'd believed them. I'd ignored every instinct that told me to guard my boundaries. I'd smiled through the small jabs, convinced myself they were just teasing. I'd even told a friend last week how proud I was for finally being in control of my life again. And now that control was gone, stolen by the same people who'd once called me the responsible one. I pulled up the transfers again, trying to process the numbers, but they looked surreal. It wasn't just the money, it was everything it represented. Security, independence, proof that I could stand on my own after the divorce. And now it was all sitting in my sister's account, like it had never belonged to me at all. I thought about calling her right then, demanding an explanation. But I knew how that conversation would go. Leah would twist it, cry, say it was temporary. Greg would probably snort, just like he did at the reunion, and tell me to stop overreacting. The thought of hearing their voices made my skin crawl. Instead, I sat there, frozen, as the reality settled in layers. They hadn't just taken my money. They'd taken the last bit of trust I had left. Somewhere between disbelief and fury, a strange calm began to form. It wasn't peace, more like a quiet before a storm. I wasn't going to scream or beg. I was going to find out exactly how they did it, and then I was going to make sure they'd regret it. I drove straight to their house before I could even think about calming down. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles whitened. The entire way there, I rehearsed what I'd say. Questions, accusations, maybe even a plea for an explanation that made sense. But deep down, I already knew there was no misunderstanding to fix. They'd taken my money, my sister, my brother-in-law, the people I once trusted with everything. When I pulled into their driveway, Greg's truck was parked out front. The same truck he'd bragged about buying cash down, even though Leah once hinted they'd been struggling with their mortgage. I stepped out, heart pounding, and walked up the porch steps. No hesitation, no knocking. I opened the door. They were both in the kitchen. The smell of coffee filled the air, warm, ordinary, infuriatingly normal. Leah sat at the counter, scrolling through her phone. Greg leaned against the counter, mug in hand, like it was just another lazy morning. Leah looked up first, startled, then her expression flickered into guilt. Greg didn't even flinch. "I think we need to talk," I said, voice shaking. "Now," Greg raised an eyebrow. "Morning to you too," he said. "Coffee?" I ignored him. "Where's my money?" That got Leah's attention. She put her phone down, her lips parting like she wanted to respond but couldn't form the words. Greg, on the other hand, smirked, slow, deliberate. "Your money?" he echoed. Funny, last I checked, family shares what they've got. I stared at him. You drained my account, Greg. You transferred everything I had. Don't pretend this is some misunderstanding. He shrugged, taking another sip of coffee. We needed it more, he said flatly. You'll be fine. I blinked, unsure I'd heard right. You'll be fine? The words came out sharp, disbelieving. That was my life savings, the money I worked for. Every overtime hour, every freelance gig, and you'll make more, he cut in, voice dripping with condescension. You always do. Look, you don't have kids. You don't have anyone depending on you. Leah and I are drowning. Medical bills, the kids' school, mortgage, real responsibilities. We just did what family does. Redistribution. Redistribution. He said it like he was doing me a favor, like theft became noble if wrapped in family justification. I turned to Leah. You're really okay with this? I asked, barely holding my composure. You knew. You watched him do this. She looked down, fingers tightening around her mug. You don't understand. Things have been hard. Greg's hours got cut and we were desperate. You've always had a cushion and... Stop. My voice broke through hers. Don't you dare make this sound reasonable. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't deny it. She didn't apologize. She just sat there, silent, letting Greg's arrogance fill the air. I could feel the heat rising up my neck, a mix of humiliation and rage. You went behind my back, I said. You used a joint account from years ago, an account you knew I trusted you with, and instead of asking for help, you stole from me. Greg laughed under his breath. Stole? Big word for family business. We didn't steal. We took what we needed. You think you're the only one who deserves comfort? You've been sitting on that money for what? A rainy day? Well, guess what? It's raining here. Something inside me snapped. You don't get to decide that. I shouted. My voice echoed off the walls, sharp enough to make Leah flinch. You don't get to rewrite what's mine because you made bad choices. For the first time, Greg's expression hardened. Watch your tone, he warned. You're talking to your sister's husband. That sent a cold chill through me. The way he said it. Like he had power over me. Like this was about putting me in my place. And the worst part? Leah didn't defend me. She just sat there, letting him talk, letting him twist the knife deeper. You always thought you were better than us, Greg continued. Always saving, always judging. Maybe this'll humble you a little. Balance things out, I wanted to scream. To hit something, but all that came out was a whisper. You think this is balance? He smiled, a smug, satisfied curve of the mouth. Yeah, you'll bounce back. We won't. Leah finally looked at me, tears welling up. Please don't make this ugly, she said softly. We'll pay you back. Eventually, I laughed, a sound too sharp to be sane. Eventually? You think this is about the money now? I stared between them, and for the first time, the truth felt heavy and undeniable. They didn't see me as family. Not really. I was a resource. An account, an ATM they could tap whenever life got hard. I stepped back, my voice low but steady. You know what? Keep it. Every last cent. But don't ever call me family again. Leah gasped. Greg's smirk faltered for just a moment. I turned and walked out, the air behind me thick with silence. My hands trembled, but my mind was strangely clear. They'd taken what they wanted, but they had no idea what they'd just started. The days that followed blurred together, empty, heavy, impossible to separate. I kept replaying that kitchen scene in my mind, every smirk, every dismissive word, every moment I wished I'd screamed louder. I thought the anger would keep me strong, but instead, it hollowed me out. The first blow came 3 days later. My landlord called. Hey, the rent check bounced, he said casually like he was mentioning the weather. I froze, phone pressed to my ear, cheeks burning with embarrassment. That's impossible, I said, forcing a laugh. Can you check again? But he'd already done that. Twice. The account was empty. After I hung up, I sat staring at the wall for what felt like hours. I'd always prided myself on being dependable, the one who never missed a bill, never borrowed, never needed saving. Now I was the one explaining bounced checks and missed payments. Then came the car payment. The email subject line glared at me. Notice of default warning. My stomach dropped. I called the finance company immediately, trying to explain, trying to sound composed. The woman on the other end was polite but detached, her tone clipped. "Ma'am, we've already extended your grace period twice this year. If we don't receive payment by Friday, repossession will begin." By the time I hung up, I was shaking. Everything I'd built since the divorce, my independence, my credit, my stability, was crumbling. All because two people who called themselves family had decided they needed my life more than I did. That night, I called Leah. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again and again until finally Greg picked up. "Oh," he said, voice thick with mock surprise. "Didn't think you'd call so soon." "Give me my money back, Greg," I said, my voice low, shaking. "You've had your fun. I'm done playing." He laughed, a cruel sound that made my skin crawl. "You really should have changed your old passwords, you know." "Rookie mistake." My breath caught. "What did you just say?" "Relax," he said smoothly. "You'll figure it out. Maybe next time don't act like you're better than everyone, and karma won't find you so fast." Before I could respond, he hung up. The dial tone buzzed in my ear like static, like a reminder of how powerless I was. I threw the phone across the room and sank to the floor. The next morning, I went to the bank again, determined to fight. I brought every document I had, account statements, old co-signing forms, proof that I'd removed myself from the joint account years ago. But the woman behind the desk just frowned, eyes scanning the screen. "Technically," she said, "since your name was still on that joint account, it's not considered fraud." I stared at her, speechless. They drained my personal savings into that account. Without my consent, she sighed sympathetically, but her words were final. "Legally, you shared ownership. You'll need to pursue this in civil court." Civil court. That meant months, lawyers, fees I couldn't afford anymore. By the time I left the bank, my legs felt weak. Outside, the city looked the same. People rushing, horns blaring, life moving forward. But I felt like I was fading out of it. A ghost among the living. I tried talking to friends, hoping someone would understand. But their faces tightened when I told them it was my sister. "Maybe just let it go," one of them said gently. "It's family. Money comes and goes. Money comes and goes." Easy to say when it isn't your roof on the line, when it isn't your trust that's been gutted. Their words sank deeper than they meant to. Suddenly, I stopped answering calls. I stopped opening the curtains. I couldn't stand the light, couldn't stand pretending. I'd always believed that being kind, being generous, meant doing the right thing. But now, that same kindness had been turned against me like a weapon. Nights became the worst. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how easily it had all unraveled. One decision, one signature years ago on that joint account. That was all it took. My mind kept whispering the same question. Was I too trusting or just too naive? Sometimes I'd catch myself blaming the wrong person, me. If I'd been more guarded, if I hadn't helped them so much, maybe they wouldn't have seen me as a target. Maybe they would have respected me instead of resenting me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. People like Greg didn't respect kindness. They consumed it. Days turned into weeks. I paid bills with what little freelance work I could scrape together, sold old jewelry, canceled everything non-essential. Every transaction felt like another piece of me disappearing. I thought about reporting Greg to the police, but even that seemed futile. What would they say? It's family. The same phrase everyone used to excuse the unforgivable. Eventually, I stopped fighting. I sat in silence, surrounded by unpaid bills and broken trust, wondering if the universe was punishing me for being the dependable one. Maybe kindness was just weakness dressed up to look noble. But under that numbness, something else began to stir, small, faint, but real. The humiliation had burned so deep it left behind something sharper. Not anger, not yet. Something colder. A promise that this wouldn't be the end of my story. It happened by accident. I wasn't looking for help. I'd stopped expecting it from anyone. But sometimes life sends the right person when you've already stopped believing in right people. It was late, almost 8 p.m., and I was still at the office, hunched over my desk, staring blankly at spreadsheets that had nothing to do with my own mess. My mind kept drifting to the balance I'd lost, to the smug look on Greg's face when he said, "We needed it more." I didn't realize someone else was still there until I heard a quiet voice behind me. "You've been staring at that screen for 20 minutes, it said. I turned to see Daniel from accounting, soft-spoken, polite, one of those people who always notice things others didn't. "I'm fine," I lied automatically. He hesitated, then gave a small, knowing smile. "You don't look fine." Something about the gentleness in his tone made my defenses crack. Maybe it was exhaustion. Or maybe I just needed someone, anyone, to hear me without judgment. I told him everything, haltingly at first, then faster once the dam broke. The reunion, the theft, the bank's indifference, Greg's callous mockery. By the time I finished, Daniel was silent, brows drawn in quiet disbelief. He finally said, "You still have the transaction records?" I nodded and opened my email, pulling up the statements I'd been torturing myself with for weeks. He leaned over, scanning the screen, eyes narrowing as he studied the pattern of withdrawals. "This isn't random," he murmured. "He's layering transfers, see? Smaller amounts funneled through intermediate accounts before the big withdrawal. Classic concealment move." I blinked, confused. "You mean he's hiding it?" "Exactly." He clicked through the data, typing quickly. "This isn't about paying bills. He's trying to make the trail hard to follow." I watched him piece it together with the quiet focus of someone who genuinely cared about the truth. He traced the transfers to a business name I didn't recognize, Walters Property Solutions. My chest tightened. "That's Greg's last name," I whispered. Daniel looked up, expression grave. "It's a shell," he said. "Barely active, probably just for moving money. He didn't just steal from you. He laundered it through something that looks legitimate." Hearing it out loud made my stomach twist. "So what do I do?" "The bank already told me it's not fraud." He sat back, eyes steady on mine. "Then we make it fraud. You document everything. Screenshots, account numbers, the shell company info. Once you show intent to conceal, it's no longer a family dispute. It's financial crime." His voice was calm, methodical, but there was conviction in it, something that pulled me out of the fog I'd been trapped in. "You really think I can do that?" I asked. "I don't think," he said. "I know. He counted on you feeling helpless. You don't have to stay that way." The words hit deeper than he probably realized. For weeks, I'd been moving through life like a shadow. Ashamed, small, defeated. But now, for the first time, someone was saying I had power left, that I wasn't crazy for wanting justice. We spent the next few hours combing through everything. Daniel helped me create a timeline of transactions, labeling each suspicious transfer. He showed me how to pull business registration data, how to track ownership filings. Each discovery felt like reclaiming a small piece of myself. By midnight, my exhaustion had shifted into something sharper. Focus. "He thought he was smarter than me," I said quietly, scrolling through the shell account's activity. "He thought I wouldn't notice." Daniel smiled faintly. "Then let's make sure he notices you now." When I left the office that night, the air felt different. The city lights no longer looked mocking. They looked alive. For the first time since that awful morning, I wasn't drowning in shame. I was planning. Greg had stolen my money, yes. But worse, he'd stolen my dignity. That was the part I wanted back most. And with Daniel's help, I was starting to see how. I stopped crying the night Daniel showed me the shell company. Something in me shifted. The tears dried up, replaced by something colder, sharper, more deliberate. I wasn't their victim anymore. Not their quiet, dependable sister who could be guilted into silence. I was their reckoning, and they didn't even know it yet. Every evening after work, I came home, made myself a pot of tea, and sat in front of my laptop. The routine became ritual, steady, precise, almost sacred. I combed through every statement, every email, every digital receipt I could find. I'd always been meticulous, the kind of person who saved PDFs and double-checked balances. Now that habit became my weapon. The deeper I went, the uglier it got. At first, I thought maybe Greg had taken the money to cover debts or medical bills like Leah hinted. But no. The transactions told a different story, a very expensive one. There were luxury store charges I didn't recognize, new furniture deliveries, flight bookings. I followed the trail through card payments and booking references, until I found photos Leah had posted weeks earlier on social media. A sunlit resort, palm trees, ocean views. "Much-needed getaway with the family," her caption said. My blood ran cold. The trip had happened right after the transfers. My money had paid for it. I scrolled through her page, every smiling photo now looking like a mockery. Designer sunglasses, a new diamond bracelet, a remodeled kitchen I remembered her bragging about at the reunion. "Greg got a great deal on materials," she'd said. Now I knew what kind of deal she meant. That night, I started a new folder on my drive titled Proof. Inside, I saved everything: screenshots of bank statements, social media posts, purchase receipts, timestamps. I even recorded voice memos, snippets of my thoughts as I pieced it all together. January transfer, $6,800. February, $12,000. Shell company registered 2 weeks prior. Pattern repeats monthly. My voice sounded calm, detached, almost unrecognizable. But I wasn't just building a file. I was building a case. The next weekend, I called Leah, pretending to make peace. I recorded every second of it. She sounded wary at first, but softened when I said, "I just want to understand." Guilt made people talk. It was one thing I'd learned fast. She rambled for a while about stress, about how hard things had been, how Greg just handled the money side. But the more she talked, the more she slipped. She admitted knowing about the transfers. She even mentioned the temporary borrowing they'd planned to replace once the business took off. Every word, every breath, captured in crystal clarity. When the call ended, I replayed it. The sound of her voice, soft, guilty, full of excuses, didn't hurt anymore. It fueled me. I started digging into Walter's Property Solutions next. The registration listed Greg's name, but the address, ironically, was their home. I traced payments from that business to an online vendor account under his personal email. The same email he'd used to send family photos, group messages, birthday invites. The arrogance of it almost made me laugh. I gathered everything. I printed physical copies and sealed them in a manila envelope marked Duplicate 1. Another copy I uploaded to a cloud folder, secured under 2-factor authentication and an encrypted password only Daniel and I knew. I wasn't taking chances this time. Every discovery made me feel a little lighter. A little less like the helpless woman whose rent check bounced, and a little more like someone reclaiming control. The fear that once lived in my chest began to shift, first to clarity, then to resolve. Some nights I'd pause, stare at my reflection in the laptop screen, and hardly recognize the woman looking back. Her eyes weren't soft anymore. They were steady, focused, unblinking. I began to understand something painful but liberating. People like Greg thrived because they believed decent people wouldn't fight back. They counted on politeness, on guilt, on silence. That's how they kept control, by convincing you that protecting your peace meant surrendering your justice, but I wasn't surrendering anymore. I rehearsed future. Conversations in my head, not the kind filled with pleading or shouting, but the kind where I'd calmly present evidence, file after file. While watching the color drain from their faces, I imagined the sound of Greg's laughter dying when he realized I'd outsmarted him. One night, while cross-referencing transfers, I caught myself smiling. A small, dangerous smile. It wasn't joy exactly. It was the satisfaction of seeing the truth lined up in front of me like dominoes, ready to fall. By the end of the week, the proof folder had over 100 files. Documents, photos, screenshots, call recordings. Enough to turn their smug confidence into panic. Enough to make them realize that the quiet sister they'd stolen from wasn't quiet anymore. As I shut down the computer that night, I whispered to myself, "You wanted redistribution? Fine, let's redistribute consequences." The fear was gone. Only precision remained. The morning I walked into the lawyer's office, I felt like I was stepping into another version of myself. Not the one who cried over empty accounts or begged her sister for decency. This version was quiet, calculated, and burning with a calm kind of fury. The receptionist asked if I needed coffee, and I almost laughed. Coffee? No, I needed justice. The lawyer, her name was Miranda, wasn't what I expected. No stiff suit or sharp edges. She had a calm energy, like someone who'd seen every form of betrayal imaginable and didn't flinch anymore. She listened as I laid everything out. The transfers, the shell company, the fake business, the recordings. I expected pity or surprise, but all I got was a slow nod. "You've done half my work already," she said, flipping through my folder. "This isn't a family disagreement. This is fraud." Hearing that word out loud hit differently. Fraud. Not a misunderstanding, not a family issue. Fraud. She explained how complicated cases like mine could get, how family connections often blurred lines in the eyes of the law. "But," she added, leaning forward, "the paper trail is clean. You have digital proof of intent, misrepresentation, and personal gain. You can absolutely pursue this." I asked the question that had been haunting me. "Will they go to jail?" "Possibly," she said, "but we'll start with a civil suit. Let's freeze what we can, file what we must, and let them talk themselves into deeper holes. People like this always do." There was something chilling about how certain she sounded. "Let them hang themselves with their own arrogance," she said, and I knew exactly what she meant, so I signed the paperwork. My hand didn't even tremble. It felt strange, empowering and terrifying all at once. The system was finally on my side, and for once, I didn't have to shout to be heard. Miranda filed the case quietly, under confidentiality. No family phone calls, no warnings, not yet. She said the element of surprise was my strongest weapon. "If they think you're licking your wounds, they'll get sloppy," she told me. "And every lie they tell will tighten the noose." In the weeks that followed, I lived two lives. By day, I went to work, smiled at coworkers, and pretended everything was fine. By night, I met with Miranda, signed documents, and tracked progress. The fraud case was moving. Subpoenas were being drafted. The bank had frozen suspicious accounts. Every step brought a quiet satisfaction. Then came the dinner. My mother had organized another family gathering, just to keep everyone connected. The irony made my stomach twist. I wanted to skip it, but Miranda's words echoed in my head. Let them hang themselves. So I went. The moment I walked in, I saw Greg holding court at the table. His laugh filled the room, too loud, too fake. Leah sat beside him, smiling like a woman who knew she was complicit but didn't dare show guilt. "Look who decided to show up," Greg called out. "Our little banker." He raised his glass in a mock toast. I forced a polite smile. "Just thought I'd check in on the family business," I said softly. He chuckled, missing the venom beneath my words. "Oh, the business is booming," he bragged. "Takes guts and brains, you know? Not everyone's cut out for it." I wanted to ask if guts and brains meant stealing your sister's life savings, but I stayed quiet. Miranda had warned me. Patience was everything. Throughout dinner, I watched him. The way he dominated conversations, boasted about deals, exaggerated his success. Every word confirmed what Miranda predicted. Arrogance would undo him. He talked about new clients, expanding operations, and how hard it is managing so much money. Each lie he told in front of witnesses was another thread in the web he was weaving around himself. Leah avoided my eyes most of the night. When she did glance at me, her smile faltered. I saw guilt flicker there, small, fleeting, but I didn't mistake it for remorse. It was fear. Somewhere deep down, she knew the calmness in my voice wasn't surrender anymore. It was strategy. Toward the end of the evening, Greg launched into another boast about his smart investments. I leaned back, resting my chin on my hand, and simply said, "You should be careful with your paperwork. Banks are getting stricter about financial transparency these days." His laughter faltered just slightly, a tiny crack. Then he brushed it off with another smug grin. "Please, I've got everything under control." That sentence would come back to haunt him. When I left the dinner, I didn't say goodbye. I walked out into the cool night air feeling lighter than I had in months. I didn't need them to see my pain anymore. I wanted them to underestimate me. The next morning, Miranda called. "The courts approved our motion. We're moving forward." The words sank in slowly, like warmth after frostbite. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was initiating. Days later, subpoenas were served. Greg's face when he received one must have been priceless. I didn't see it, but Leah called me in tears, her voice trembling. "What did you do?" she demanded. I didn't raise my voice. "What you forced me to. For years they'd taken from me. Money, trust, peace. Now I was taking something back. Control." As I hung up, I imagined Greg pacing their spotless kitchen, the same place where he'd once said, "We needed it more." Only now, the silence in that room would sound different, because the legal storm had begun, and this time, it wasn't washing me away. It was washing them clean off their pedestal. Courtrooms are colder than they look on TV. The air feels heavy, like it's pressing down on everyone inside, and even the silence hums with judgment. As I sat there, hands folded tightly in my lap, I could feel my heartbeat in my fingertips. This was it, the moment everything came full circle. The day they would finally see what they'd done, not as family drama, but as fraud. Greg strolled in like it was a casual business meeting. He was wearing one of those tailored suits he probably bought with my money, flashing his too-white grin, joking with his lawyer. Leah followed behind him, pale and quiet, avoiding my gaze. When she finally did glance my way, I saw something flicker across her face. Shame, maybe. Or the faint memory of who we used to be before greed hollowed her out. Their lawyer was young, slick, and overconfident. He kept whispering to Greg, both of them laughing softly like this was some minor inconvenience. I didn't look away. I'd spent too many nights crying, too many mornings feeling small. Today, I wasn't the broken sister anymore. I was the plaintiff. When the judge entered, the room shifted. Everyone rose, and for the first time, I felt grounded. Miranda sat beside me, calm and composed, like a storm contained in a human body. She didn't need to look intimidating. Her confidence did the work for her. Greg's lawyer started first, his voice dripping with charm. "Your Honor, this case is nothing more than a misunderstanding between family members. Financial support, shared accounts, things got tangled. My client has already expressed willingness to discuss resolution outside court." I could almost hear the arrogance underneath his tone, the assumption that this would all just go away. Miranda stood slowly. "Your Honor," she said evenly, "this is not a misunderstanding. It's a documented theft, supported by digital forensics, business filings, and direct communication records. My client's funds were funneled into a fraudulent entity created by the defendant, an entity that exists solely on paper." She turned the monitor toward the judge, displaying the transfers. Line by line, transaction by transaction, the proof unfolded like a story told in numbers. Greg's smirk faded. The room was quiet except for Miranda's voice as she detailed the sequence. The shell company, the dates matching family events, the fabricated invoices with Greg's digital signature. Every lie he'd built so confidently began to collapse under the weight of evidence. I watched him shift in his chair, his jaw tightening, his laughter gone. Leah's hand trembled as she held a tissue, her eyes glassy. When Miranda played the recorded conversation, Greg's voice mocking me. "Next time, keep your passwords private." A collective murmur rippled through the courtroom. Even the judge's expression hardened. Greg's lawyer tried to object, but it was too late. The damage was done. "Mr. Walters," the judge said sternly, "did you, or did you not, authorize the creation of Walters Property Solutions? Under your name?" Greg cleared his throat, forcing a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "It's just a side project, Your Honor. Family money. We had an arrangement." Miranda didn't flinch. An arrangement that conveniently drained $87,000 from my client's account without her knowledge or consent? He started to speak, but the judge cut him off. "Enough. The documents speak for themselves." The words hit like a hammer. I felt my throat tighten, not from victory but from something deeper. Relief, disbelief, maybe even grief. I hadn't realized how much of myself I'd buried beneath anger until that moment. Leah began to cry softly. Greg looked at her, irritated, whispering something sharp that made her flinch. I didn't feel satisfaction watching them crumble. I felt quiet, still, like I'd finally exhaled after holding my breath for months. When the judge called a brief recess, Greg stood up suddenly, trying to regain control. He turned toward me with that same performative charm, his voice low, but still condescending. "You didn't have to take it this far. We're family." I met his gaze, steady and calm. "You should have thought of that before you emptied my life into your bank account." He looked stunned, not by the words themselves, but by the fact that I didn't sound angry anymore. There was nothing for him to feed on, just finality. During the recess, Leah approached me hesitantly. "I never meant for it to go this far," she whispered, mascara streaking her cheeks. "Greg said he'd pay it back, I swear." I looked at her, and for a moment, I almost saw the sister I'd grown up with, the one who borrowed my sweaters and laughed until we cried. But that girl was gone. I shook my head. "You didn't stop him," I said quietly. "That's the same as helping him." When court resumed, Miranda delivered her closing statement with surgical precision. She didn't raise her voice once. "Your Honor," she said, "this isn't just about money. It's about trust, weaponized against someone who believed family meant safety. If this theft had been committed by a stranger, no one would hesitate to call it what it is: criminal. Blood ties don't change the facts." Her words hung in the air long after she finished. Even Greg couldn't meet anyone's eyes now. The judge took a deep breath, scanning the documents one last time. "Given the evidence presented," he said, "the court finds in favor of the plaintiff. Immediate restitution of stolen funds is ordered. Additionally, an investigation into possible criminal conduct will proceed." I didn't move. I just sat there, my heart pounding so hard it drowned out every other sound. The gavel came down like thunder. Greg's lawyer muttered something under his breath. Leah covered her face and sobbed. "And me?" I stayed perfectly still, watching them realize what it felt like to lose control. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was clarity. When it was over, Miranda gathered the papers and gave me a small nod. "They underestimated you," she said softly. "Most people like them always do." As I stood, Greg tried one last time to regain his swagger. "You'll regret this," he hissed under his breath. I turned toward him, my voice steady. "No, Greg. The only thing I regret is not learning sooner that silence is just another way of giving permission." He looked away first. When I walked out of that courtroom, sunlight hit my face through the high glass windows, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel used or pitied. I felt free. And as the doors closed behind me, I realized the best revenge wasn't the verdict. It was the peace of knowing I'd finally ended their hold over me. When the judge delivered the final ruling, I barely registered the words at first. They came like distant echoes through water. Full restitution, asset freeze, damages awarded. It took a few heartbeats for the meaning to sink in. Greg's empire, the one he'd built on lies and my savings, was crumbling in real time. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Reporters in the back scribbled notes, drawn by the irony of a family business, exposed as theft. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I didn't need to gloat. The truth was doing that for me. Greg's lawyer looked defeated, eyes darting between the paperwork and his client. Greg himself was pale, lips tight, his usual swagger gone. He opened his mouth like he might protest, but the judge's next words silenced him completely. "Mr. Walters, your accounts and properties are now under court supervision pending restitution. Any attempt to access or conceal funds will result in immediate criminal referral. Leah gasped softly beside him. I saw her reach for his arm, but he shook her off, glaring at the floor. For years, I'd watched that same look turn other people to dust. Friends, family, even Leah. But now it was powerless. That realization was strangely tender, like watching a weapon rust away. When the hearing ended, Miranda packed up our files methodically, as if this were any other case. She turned to me with a faint smile. "It's done," she said. "The court will ensure repayment. You can finally breathe. Breathe." I hadn't realized how long I'd been holding it. The sound that left my chest wasn't quite a laugh. It was something between a sigh and a release. Outside the courthouse, the sun was blinding, reflecting off the marble steps. Reporters called out questions, but I ignored them. I wasn't here for a headline. This wasn't revenge anymore. It was closure. Leah caught up to me just as I reached the bottom of the stairs. Her mascara was smudged, her hands trembling. "Please," she said softly, almost choking on the word. "Please don't let them take everything. Greg made mistakes, but we can fix this. We're family." I turned to face her, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the sister I used to love, the one who borrowed my sweaters and cried over heartbreaks on my shoulder. But that person was gone, buried beneath too many excuses.